Hey guys, so we're continuing Africa. We pretty much saw most of these slides the other day, but I want to finish up a couple other major ones. And let's start with African landforms. So one of the things I mentioned was Mount Kilimanjaro and how it was the tallest mountain in Africa, but also it has every single type of climate zone in the world. You can see it right here with the glacier on top, many other types of climates. Also, it's got neat giraffes in it, so I figure that's a pretty great picture for that reason. However, there's a number of problems that came with harnessing the raw materials that Africa had. For the most part, there's been a lot of deorganization after the imperialist era, which meant they were under the control of Europeans. Essentially, there's a lot of disagreements about which group should be in charge in Africa, and so this means that Africa has faced incredible amounts of civil war. To this day, most Africans earn their living in agriculture, growing crops such as coffee, cacao, and palm oil. Now, I think you guys know what coffee is. It actually doesn't originate in Africa, though. It originated in Saudi Arabia. In fact, Arabs were so fond of their coffee that when Europeans first encountered it, they called it Arab wine. Now, cacao, on the other hand, is a little bit different. Cacao is where cocoa comes from. Cacao is a pod, it has little white beans in it, and when you let it ferment and process it, you can turn it into cacao or cocoa, which can then be processed in all kinds of other great chocolate products. Palm oil comes from palm trees, as you can imagine, and is useful in all kinds of things. In fact, it's surprising the amount of stuff that has palm oil in it. Just check sometime some of the ingredients list on stuff you buy, and you'll be surprised. As far as in north of Africa, the Sahara Desert is the most important physical feature in northern Africa. The center part of Africa contains a significant number of rainforests, as well as we have significant amounts of grasslands across much of the climate. Rain is incredibly varied due to the effects of wind and elevation. I don't know if you guys covered this, but one of the things that affects this is called the rain shadow effect. If you guys don't know, that's where mountain chains block the moisture coming in from the oceans, and the air that gets over the mountains is completely devoid of moisture. And so you'll have on one side of a mountain chain just very green, lovely areas. On the other side is desert. So this is one effect that it has. Also, wind patterns, the way they blow, helps to partially cause the varied climates that are found in Africa. And that's pretty much it for today on that section. So let's go ahead and open up the next section. We talked about region, the cultures of Africa, which are going to be pretty varied. So let's start with that, shall we? So the history of Africa can be broken up into three main categories: the Age of Kingdoms, or also known as the pre-European or pre-imperial period, the colonial period, and the modern era. Now, during the Age of Kingdoms, there were a number of very, very powerful kingdoms. Some of them, like Ghana and the Songhai, developed because of the trade coming off of the Silk Road, which was this major set of trade routes that stretched all the way from northern Africa into China. Others established themselves through agriculture and the mining of precious resources such as gold. Kingdoms like Futujeon and even Egypt developed because of a lot of these different factors. And over time, their power waned largely due to the effects of imperialism. It all started with the imperialist nations of Europe trying to find a way around Africa. They were trying to get to the spice trade routes that they found coming out of the Ottoman Empire, and even before that, the Seljuk Empire, which is in modern-day Turkey. Basically, Africa was this big place in the way, and so Henry the Navigator this prince of Portugal decided to try to go around Africa and set up outposts, which are sort of like little colonies along the way. And with this early contact with Africans, they found that slavery was part of their culture, and they were willing to trade slaves, particularly for these wonderful new weapons that the Europeans had called guns. And so there was really no need for slavery at this time, so the Portuguese went around. That all changed when Spain made a drive to the west under Christopher Columbus. When they encountered the natives in the New World, they were immediately put to work by conquistadors like Hernando Cortez into mining gold. However, the natives died en masse because of diseases like smallpox, and replacement labor had to be had. So the transatlantic slave trade began. Over time, this had a dramatic effect on the population of Africa, because if you think about it, the type of people caught as slaves and sold as slaves were often very strong individuals, very intelligent individuals, individuals who were healthy and young, all these traits that were seen as desirable by the slave traders. And ultimately, this meant that there was a colossal brain drain effect on the continent of Africa. Eventually, the Europeans sought to expand their influence in Africa and literally conquer it. This was because by that point, Europe had undergone an industrial revolution. They had gone through this process of having machines do the work of humans and animals, and this required a vast amount of raw resources, everything from coal to iron. And Africa, as we know, is filled with these raw materials. However, there was a problem. One, there was a lot of different groups, very powerful kingdoms in Africa, that one European power couldn't hope to take on by themselves. The second was all the European powers wanted a piece of Africa. So they met in a conference in Berlin in 1884 to partition Africa, break it up amongst the various European powers, giving each the ability to invade another. Now, when they were drawing these lines between the various European powers, they specifically drew it so that countries that would be established would have tribal enemies in them. This is significant because once the Europeans are gone, once we get into the modern era, these tribal enemies are in the same country together. Think of them as being like the political parties we have in the United States, only they have been hating each other for centuries and literally fighting wars. How are you going to get those people to work together in a democratic society? It's a really difficult question. So the Berlin Conference partitions Africa, sets tribal enemies together in the same countries, and frees the various European powers to attack only small independent nations as opposed to one big nation. And this has a dramatic effect. Africa is effectively conquered by the Europeans, and note, not a single African was invited to the Berlin Conference. They were not considered at all. And as the European powers waned in power at the end of World War II, started giving up their colonies, yes, sweetie, Africa is going to be set on its own course for self-rule, yet they've essentially been colonies for the past 200 years. How are they supposed to now have an effective economy? How are they supposed to develop? How are they supposed to do all these things? This is a tough question, and we'll get to that at a later date. For now, I think that's enough for one day. So make certain you get all these notes, that you have your shopping list for next time we meet, and otherwise I hope you guys have a good day. Take care.